If you look back at the landscape of European football in the early to mid-2000s, you are looking at an era of gods. You had the Galacticos in Madrid with Zidane and the original Ronaldo. You had Thierry Henry gliding past defenders at Highbury. You had Ronaldinho bending reality in Barcelona. But if you were to walk into any locker room in Italy's Serie A, which was, at the time, the most unforgiving, defensively brutal league on the planet, and ask the greatest defenders who they feared the most, they wouldn't name any of those legends. They would name a man who hit a football with such terrifying, violent velocity that it felt less like a sport and more like a weapon. They would name a player who seemed mathematically impossible, a glitch in the matrix of football. They called him l'Imperatore, the Emperor. At 6'3", Adriano Leite Ribeiro possessed the physical dominance of a heavyweight boxer. He had the chest and shoulders of a centre-back, but the agility of a natural winger. And attached to that massive frame was a left foot that simply defied the laws of physics. For a brief, shining, terrifying window in time, he was the undisputed king of Milan. If you played video games back then, specifically Pro Evolution Soccer 6, you already know the legend. He was the guy with 99 shot power. The guy you picked when you wanted to cheat. But his reign didn't end because of a shattered knee. It didn't end because of age or a massive transfer gone wrong. It ended because of a single phone call that broke the heart of a giant. To understand the sudden, tragic fall of Adriano, you first have to understand the fire that forged him. He was not the product of a pristine European academy. He didn't grow up with state-of-the-art sports science or manicured grass pitches. Adriano was born in the Villa Cruzeiro favela in Rio de Janeiro, one of the most impoverished and dangerous neighborhoods in Brazil. Growing up, the sound of gunfire was just background noise. In that environment, football wasn't just a game, it was a lifeline. But Adriano had an anchor that most kids in the favela didn't: his father, Almir. Almir was the shield. He kept a young Adriano away from the violent drug gangs that controlled the streets. He worked tirelessly to provide, and he bore the physical scars of that environment. When Adriano was just 10 years old, his father was struck in the head by a stray bullet during a shootout. Miraculously, Almir survived, but the bullet remained lodged in his skull for the rest of his life. Seeing his father carry that literal and metaphorical weight changed the boy. From that day on, Adriano made a silent vow. Every goal, every sprint, every ounce of effort he put into football was dedicated to one single purpose: getting his family out of Villa Cruzeiro and making his father proud. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear that Adriano was a mutant of the sport. He was signed by Flamengo, and it didn't take long for Europe to come calling. Inter Milan brought him across the Atlantic, and after a brief loan spell at Parma to sharpen his teeth, he returned to the San Siro ready to conquer the world. And conquer it he did. By 2004, Adriano was simply unplayable. Imagine a striker who could shoulder charge Paolo Maldini into the grass, bring a 60-yard pass completely dead on his chest, and then unleash a shot from 30 yards out that the goalkeeper couldn't even track with his eyes. On August 14, 2001, in a friendly against Real Madrid, he introduced himself to the world by stepping up to a free kick that was a solid 35 yards out. He struck the ball with such ferocity that it clocked in at over 105 miles per hour. The ball hit the back of the net before the legendary Iker Casillas could even fully extend his arms. In the summer of 2004, he dragged Brazil to the Copa America title, scoring a miracle equalizer against Argentina in the 93rd minute. He was the tournament's top scorer. He was named the best player. He was earning millions. He had finally bought his family a mansion far away from the dangers of the favela. He was 22 years old, standing on top of the world. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, one of the most arrogant and brilliant players in history, later said, "I played with champions. I played with players that were already wow. But the one I felt could do it longer, and didn't, was Adriano. He was an animal. Nobody could tackle him. Nobody could take the ball." Everything Adriano had promised that 10-year-old boy in Rio, he had delivered. He was the emperor. Then came the phone call. It was August 4th, 2004. Inter Milan was in the middle of pre-season training. The sun was shining. The mood was light. Inter's legendary captain, Javier Zanetti, was standing nearby when someone handed Adriano a phone. It was a call from Brazil. On the other end of the line, a voice told Adriano that his father, Almir, the man who had survived a bullet to the head, the man who was the sole reason Adriano played the game, had suddenly died of a heart attack. He was only 44 years old. Zanetti, a man who had seen everything in football, later recounted that moment with haunting clarity. He said he got a phone call from Brazil. He threw the phone and started screaming. You can't imagine that kind of scream. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. To the fans in the stands, for a little while at least, Adriano kept playing. He scored spectacular goals. He would rip his shirt off, look up to the sky and point, tears streaming down his face. But behind closed doors, a massive, unfillable void had opened up inside him. He had conquered the footballing world for his father. Without Almir there to witness it, the crown suddenly felt incredibly heavy and entirely worthless. The grief was suffocating. Adriano was a man thousands of miles away from home, completely hollowed out by loss. To numb the overwhelming pain, he turned to alcohol. The decline wasn't an immediate crash. It was a slow, agonizing spiral. It was hidden at first by a club that loved him desperately. Adriano would show up to Inter Milan's training facility completely intoxicated. The medical staff, trying to protect their superstar from the ravenous Italian press, would let him sleep it off in the infirmary and tell the media that he was dealing with minor muscular issues. But the pitch doesn't lie. Football at the highest level requires an absolute obsessive dedication to the craft. As the alcohol took hold, the terrifying pace vanished. The sheer explosive power faded into fatigue. The muscle turned to weight. Managers tried everything. Roberto Mancini tried tough love. The club president, Massimo Moratti, treated him like a son and tried giving him extended time away. But the fire inside him was gone. Adriano later confessed, "I was alone, sad and depressed in Italy, and that's when I started drinking. I only felt happy when I drank, and I did it every night. I drank everything I could get my hands on. Wine, whiskey, vodka, beer. A lot of beer. I didn't stop drinking, and in the end, I had to leave Inter." The psychological weight of grief had achieved what no defense on earth could do. It stopped him cold. Eventually, Adriano realized he couldn't keep lying to himself, and he couldn't keep lying to the game. He walked away from the millions in Europe. He terminated his lucrative contracts and retreated across the ocean. He went back to the only place on earth where he felt safe, where people didn't look at him as a commodity or a fallen idol. He went back to Villa Cruzeiro, back to the favela. The global sports media wrote him off as a tragic failure. They called him a cautionary tale of wasted talent and lack of discipline. Photographers would snap pictures of him sitting on the curb in Rio, overweight, drinking a beer, and they would mock his downfall. But the media entirely missed the point. Adriano didn't fall because he was lazy. He didn't fall because he got distracted by fame or arrogance. He fell because he was devastatingly human. He walked away from a footballing empire because he realized that sitting on a throne meant absolutely nothing without his father standing beside him to share the view. Today, Adriano is back in Brazil. He doesn't live in a European mansion. He spends his time with his childhood friends in the community that raised him. He laughs, he rides on the back of motorcycles, and he lives a quiet life. When people ask him about his career, he doesn't sound bitter. He just says that he found his peace. He might be football's greatest what if. We will never know how many Ballon d'Ors he could have won, or how many Champions Leagues he could have dominated. But for 3 golden years, the world got to witness a true emperor. He was a force of nature driven by a son's love for his father. And no one who saw him play will ever forget it.